And so today I'm finishing up with my short series of lessons on forgiveness. I've been talking about that for the last 2 weeks, and so I'm going to finish that up today. And as I've said before, I know the reason I talked about forgiveness is because I believe it is so important. It's an important process that we all engage in because, as I said, first week I talked about it, forgiveness is a process of untying or loosing those knots that can somehow we allow to get in the way of the flow. You know, in the Greek translation of the word forgive that's what it's talking about, is letting go, loosing the ties that bind us to the past. And I see that as these knots that restrict the flow of love between me and you. And so forgiveness is that process of opening it up. And as we talked about yesterday in our workshop with Mark Ehrlichs, he talked about sometimes that energy can be like, what did he call them? Log jams. Log jams, when we have those emotional and mental energy that we're allowing to restrict us and we're holding on to resentment and fear and anger and all of those things that can be like log jams that restrict the flow of that life through us, the life energy that God is living through us. And it demonstrates, and we hang on to that. It demonstrates in our bodies. And so it's important for us. I think forgiveness is a way that we can let go of some of that and open up the flow emotionally and mentally. And also, it's a big topic. It's rich. It's a rich topic and much more complex and detailed than I can possibly do justice to in 3 talks. So I encourage us all to explore it in many ways. Many teachers talk about forgiveness, and so there are many ways to explore it. I just want to make you aware that there is a workshop coming up the first weekend in November at Unity on the Avenue Spiritual Center. Reverend Sheila Gautreaux is coming in, and she's doing a radical forgiveness workshop. That's the work of Colin Tipping, and he's been around a long time, and it's a very powerful way of processing through forgiveness. But today I want to talk about forgiveness as in the respect of how what we might think of as asking for and receiving forgiveness from another. And I want to use a story that many of us are familiar with. I will be using a story that many of us are familiar with from our scripture. You know, Jesus of Nazareth was a pretty good storyteller. A lot of that oral tradition always passed down through oral tradition and finally written down in the Gospels. And so we have this story from Jesus. And, I love these little parables. These parables. Jesus often taught in parables, little allegorical stories that were intended to teach a truth, a spiritual truth. And very often he would teach in that way. And I'm guessing that probably those who are listening to the stories are a lot like some of us, and me included, that don't always understand the lesson, that we don't always get it. And I'm guessing that was probably true then as well. But what's so great about that is that the lesson in these stories is really more dependent upon the listener than it is on the teller. Because we get to decide for ourselves what that means for us, wherever we are in our own journey. That's one of the things I love about Unity's approach, metaphysical and maieutic approaches to Bible interpretation. Metaphysical meaning that we look at the Bible as the progression or evolution of human consciousness, beginning with Adam and ending with Jesus, and the consciousness and how consciousness has evolved, and what those stories mean for us, what's going on in our own consciousness, and how we can learn from that. And then maieutically is more of the Socratic method of interpretation. What does it mean to me? How can I apply it in my own life? How can I discover for myself? And so the stories may mean different things. It may mean something different to you than it means to me. It may mean something different to me today than it does tomorrow. But that's what's so beautiful, I think, about these stories, and because they're timeless. So the story I want to use today, most of you, I'm sure, I would guess that all of us are familiar with the story of the prodigal son in one way or another. So Jesus was telling the story about a father who has two sons. And one son comes to his father, and he says, "Dad, I want to go and I want to have fun. I want to go out into the world and explore. So I want you to give me my inheritance now so I can go do that and live some, So the son goes into a far-off country, and he experiences life, and he spends all of his money doing whatever he was doing, And so eventually he has no money. And he ends up on a farm sleeping with the pigs or the swine. And he can't even get food. They won't even feed him the husks that they're feeding the swine. And so he finally says, "Heck with this. I've had enough of this, and I'm going to go home to my father, even if I just have to be a laborer in his fields. I'm going to go home to my father." And so he does. And of course, his father greets him and loves him and just welcomes him back in and kills the fatted calf and has a big party for him. Well, of course, there's the older son who stayed at home and was working on the land with his father. And so he heard about his brother coming home and all this commotion going on. He said, "What's happening?" And so somebody said, "Well, haven't you heard your brother's home and there's going to be a big party?" And so he goes to his father and he says, "Hey, Dad, what the heck? I've been here working for you and you've never given me a party." And of course, his father says, "Well, son, you've always had my love. Everything that I have is yours. And so, your brother's come home, so we should celebrate all of that." So that's pretty much the story. From my tradition, from Baptist tradition, it was more of a moral story, that that God will forgive you as long as you're repentant and admitting that you're a sinner, unworthy to even sleep with the pigs. If you're repentant and come home, that God will welcome you. So it was a moral story. But that, God also welcomes those who do what's right, follow the rules, all of that kind of stuff. Well, that's maybe one way of looking at the story. But from our perspective, metaphysically, really what we teach in that is that, and again, I'm going to say one way of understanding it metaphysically, because, as I said, it's not one particular way, not one right way. So I'm going to be exploring a little bit from the perspective of forgiveness. But what we interpret that as, and I love what the Lomsa's translation of the scripture says, is that before the son came home, he came to himself. He had an awakening. That through all of that stuff and all of that going on in his life, that he was sleeping with the swine. And metaphysically, swine represents those negative thoughts and emotions. Those things that come from our belief that we are separate from God. That we're somehow out there on our own, separate from God, and we're fearful. And so those feelings and those emotions that come from that loneliness and fear and isolation when we're not connected. And so he was wrestling with all of that, sleeping with all of that. When he finally came to himself and he realized, that's not my truth. That's not my truth. And so he comes home to the realization of the God within him, the Father within him. He awakens to that Christ light, that Christ presence that Ernest Holmes was talking about. So he comes home. And the same thing with the older brother. He's trying to find himself in a very different way. He's trying to do good. He's trying to earn his value and his love and his worthiness. Again, it's just one way of looking at it. And then he may kind of come to himself as well and say, he comes home to that realization that I don't need to work to be worthy. I don't need to just follow all the rules because I'm already worthy. I'm already the Christ. So, and so it kind of wraps it all up, and it's a great little story. The end. And it sounds very simple and very easy, right? But as I've said earlier about forgiveness, what I believe about forgiveness and everything else that we teach, yes, that is like a first step, the realization, the recognition of that life and that light and that power and that Christ energy that is the truth of all of us. All of us. But then how, once we get to that place, do we demonstrate it in the world? How do we embody it? How do we be the example of that in the world? And so today, some of you may remember Paul Harvey. Some of you are old enough to remember Paul Harvey. So today, we're going to explore the rest of the story. And so I've invited a friend to come up and do a little role play today. This is David Schindal. And David is with the Rocky Mountain Compassionate Communication Network. Many of you have taken some classes here and heard a lot about compassionate communication here. And so David, at the last minute, graciously agreed to come and help me out with this today. And so we're going to do a little rest of the story, role play, as respects what might have happened after, and what does forgiveness, the process, kind of look like as we are exempling and living that Christ consciousness in the world. So, what setup? Do we need a setup? I'm going to be the younger brother, right? No, you're going to be the younger brother. I'm going to be the older brother. So I'm going to be the older brother. David's going to be the younger brother. Is that on?
Is this on? Yeah.
Yes. And so I'm going to assume, David's going to assume that because the younger brother has been through all of this stuff, that he has some awakening and that he is coming from a little bit different perspective. And the older brother is not. So let's see how it plays out.
All right. Should we first do the not empathy part?
Yeah.
Okay. This is not empathy. Don't do this one.
Yeah, this is not. This is what not to do, right? So do I start? So what are you thinking? Where the heck were you? Anyway, and then you come back into our lives like, ta-da, I'm back. And Dad throws this big party for you. I've been here working all this time. And you're off doing God knows what. What's up with that, man?
Well, it's all in divine order. And, and the Lord works in mysterious ways. And so, just, sit with that. And I hope that helps.
It does not help. At all. It's crap about divine order. Whatever. No, it does not help.
All right, here's empathy.
What is up, man? Where have you been all this time? I didn't know where you were, Dad didn't know where you were, and then you just waltz back in like nothing ever happened, and Dad throws this big party for you. What about me? I've been here the whole time, working, taking care of Dad. I don't get it, man. And then, whatever.
Brother, I really want to understand you. I'm sensing a lot of anger and shock in confusion about how I could be treated this way when you've been working so hard and you would really like to be seen for your efforts to be on this path, the right path of God. And you would like that to be seen. Is that what's going on for you?
There's some of that, yeah. There's some of that. And I didn't know where you were, man. I mean, we were so close before you left, and then you just left me here to fend for myself.
So I'm hearing now just the almost heartbreak and the hurt about, the actions I took are just the exact opposite of what you would like in our relationship. Just care, trust, togetherness, and that you're really wanting to be seen for how hurtful you feel about that.
Yeah, that's it. I want you to know how hurtful it was for me, for you to abandon me when we were so close.
Thank you. I'm really taking that in. And I want you to know that I'm here now. And however long it takes, even if it's forever, I want to ask your forgiveness and to be with you in wherever you are in that process. How does that sound to you?
Sounds good, and it may take me a while. It may take me some time. So what was going on with you? Why did you leave?
It was out of a sense of wanting to be free, and what at that time I thought was freedom was to go out and explore and do all the things that I was told that I couldn't do. And I wanted to see for myself. It was something about freedom, and that's what was the impulse. And I see now actually I got what I was wanting. Because I wanted freedom, and I see what freedom, a bigger sense of freedom is like. So that was my path.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that with me. I can hear that. And I can feel that. And I can see I want the same thing. I just didn't know how to do it. I thought I had to stay here. So I hear that, and I'm still hurting. It's still painful for me. And so I think we can have more conversation and take some time.
I feel so relieved to hear that there's openness.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for David for demonstrating that and the connection. And you notice that he really never said, "Forgive me." Because what I want to talk about a little bit as I close this is that, as I said earlier, forgiveness is really about letting go and restoring connection, or at least opening the way for that to happen. And do you see how powerful it was when the one who was feeling hurt and betrayed and abandoned was connected with in a very meaningful way? I hear you. I see you. I feel you. Even if he never even thought he did anything wrong, how powerful it is. He never said, "Well, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done it." You see? But it's powerful to be willing to be present with the other person And you may even say, wow, it's so painful for me. Can you maybe even find it somewhere in your heart to forgive me? But you see, we don't do it for someone else. We do it for ourselves. And if they come along with us, that is rich and that is beautiful. But see, the older brother has to do his own work, his own process. And so I know it can be confusing at times, painful at times, when somebody is holding some hurt or resentment about something that we did, and it feels like they're hanging on to it. They don't want to let it go. And we can do everything we possibly can do to reach into and to feel and to experience the other's energy. And yet we're not responsible. We're not responsible for what they do with it. And that can sometimes be painful. So it's important, I think, really what I wanted to share and to demonstrate with us today is that process of connection. That activity, the frustration that was stimulated, the pain in the older brother that was stimulated by his younger brother leaving, the resentment and all of that, was that unforgiveness, that holding on to that blocks, well, it doesn't block, it creates a logjam of that flow of love and connection. And he may want to hold on to that. It may be a place of security. It may be a place of power. But as the younger brother, as the one who's willing to be open, and as I talked about last week, it's important. So we could do a whole series of workshop on this, but David came to that as the younger brother with some empathy and compassion. But he had to do his own empathy and compassion work first. Connecting with his own feelings, his own desires, his own values, to even be able to express it. So it's our work. It's our work individually to give ourselves empathy and compassion until we are able and willing and ready to extend that to another person. And in that is where what we call forgiveness happens. And you realize, as the Course in Miracles says, and this is a tough one sometimes, that it's really all about the flow of love and what we think happened. The story that we have about what happened can somehow begin to fall away, to be examined, so that we can understand and tell a different story. Not only about the other person, but about ourselves. And so I'm sure there's a lot more I could say about that, but I won't. I'll stop. But just to reiterate, that forgiveness culminates, the process of forgiveness, I believe, culminates in a return to the awareness of who we truly are, what we truly value, what's important to us, and to the recognition, however long it takes, of my shared humanity and my shared divinity with the other person. And to be able to restore the flow of energy and love and life between us from that perspective. So forgiveness, I think, is not something that happens. Forgiveness is a process of realization and recognition, of empathy and compassion that culminates in the restoration of the flow of life through us, in us, as us, and then, when we're willing, flowing out and connecting us with the other.